Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Frank Dickey refuses to call himself a hero, but most might disagree. He says that in Vietnam he fought alongside heroes, but he, like many who went, who fought, who came home, he prefers to reserve that label for heroes who did not come home. He was not an officer, nor a company commander, nor a phantom pilot. Frank Dickey's role in Vietnam was as the guy who laid his life on the line every patrol. Just infantry armies, search and destroy, chopping away at the jungle in search of the enemy. Yes, by many standards, a hero, and it is our honor to have him as our guest on Veterans of the Valley. Frank Dickey, it is an honor to have you. Let's talk about going to Vietnam, but let's start before that. You were raised in Palestine, Texas, came to Texas A&M on a basketball scholarship. That didn't work out, and you, like so many people of that time, of the 60s, you were drafted. Sort of take it from there and how you got into country at Vietnam.
Well, I received the draft notice, as a lot of people during that era, young men of my age. It actually does say greetings. And it was signed by Lyndon Baines Johnson, and it asked me to serve my country. So I went and had my physical, and it was about 2.5 months, and I was inducted and sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana, where I had my training.
Right.
And about 4 months after that, I was in Vietnam.
Well, let's sort of give people a timeline here. December of '66, that's when you took your physical. You were inducted around February, and by April, you were in country.
Yes, sir. I think, actually, I left in April, but we went by ship when we went, and I got there in July.
Right.
So we had some stops, and I really didn't understand all that, and I was scared to death anyway, so.
What were your thoughts back then? I mean, at that point, because just a few months earlier, I mean, you were just a country guy from Palestine, Texas, and now you were off to war. What are the personal thoughts of a young man at that time?
Obviously, the war was starting to become controversial. It had gotten, I think, by '66 or '67, to start to be an issue discussed, especially in college campuses and around.
Right.
I did not disagree with the war. I thought I understood the concept of the domino theory and the fact that we were trying to contain communism, and I wanted people anywhere in the world that wanted to be free. Exactly. And you can't just be for freedom part of the time,
right,
or half of the time.
Right.
You're either for freedom or you're not.
Indeed.
And that's the way I looked at it, and so it didn't bother me much. I knew there were people who disagreed, but that's why we were fighting.
Indeed, indeed. You said, and like we said on the outset, basically you were infantry, 11th Bravo, 4th Infantry. You were on the ground with a rifle, with a piece. Talk about sort of what your job was when you got there.
Well, what we did was search and destroy missions. Our basic philosophy was that we were going to try to weed out the Viet Cong. They were hiding in the jungles and on the outskirts of villages, and we would use intelligence gathered by whatever methods, and we would go and search. Now, it wasn't just blind. We had a plan, and we knew that they were supposed to be there, but they were wily little devils. They moved. We would get to one place and they had already moved. We could tell that they'd been there, and we used that intelligence to move on and try to find them. So basically, we just hunted around Vietnam for the bad guys.
Yeah, I think you told me that in reality, about 80% of your time was spent searching, 20% time actually in contact with the enemy.
Absolutely, and
right.
I think you will find most people in combat would say that was about right. Obviously, you remember that 20% because when you're shot at, it's a lot different. But as also that I mentioned, the elements were horrible, and those were day to day, and not being able to brush your teeth as many times as you would like. Take a bath, get clean, wash your hair. those were wait till you went back to base camp and had a few days to stay back there.
Right. You were stationed at Pleiku, I believe?
Pleiku, Vietnam was the 4th Infantry Division base, and that's where we worked out of.
Mortar, machine gun, just a lot of heavy weapons in that
Well,
infantry division?
we had a unit, I believe it was Delta Company, that they loaned us mortar people, and we were in the same battalion,
right.
But just different companies. And we had 2 M60 machine guns, and I think we had an 80 millimeter mortar and a 40 millimeter mortar.
Now, you told me that your unit was somewhat unique. It was OPCON, Operational Control. Explain what that means. You were loaned out a lot, right?
For some reason, and it was probably because in 2 Corps, there wasn't much activity. Why, I don't know. So, we were actually put busy work a lot of times. I got the impression that sometimes we were searching, we weren't really looking very hard. Mm-hmm. And other units who were having contact and losing people. And as I mentioned yesterday, I think at that point in time, the supply chain that was getting replacements into Vietnam was backed up.
Right.
And we had plenty of soldiers. We just had a hard time getting them where they needed to be. And so we were asked to be under operational control. They loaned us to other units, the 101st Airborne, and even in one stint, the Marines, the 3rd Marine Division, which was in I Corps up by Da Nang. We were loaned out. I didn't like that area very much. That was a lot hotter than where we were used to being.
You were talking about the sort of the backlog of it. You mentioned that was the time that the lottery, the first lottery, was going on, and there was a lot of people coming in and getting them in country and getting them at the right spot. There were bottlenecks.
Obviously, this was the rumor coming down. Mm-hmm. We were promised, and they said they had the people. It was just getting them in country and getting them processed and, getting them there. So evidently there was a bottleneck.
Right. You went on a leave. I want you to explain this. You went on a leave, you came back home, but then you came back to Vietnam in a completely different role as a mail clerk, but then that changed. I want you to tell the story about the cook that they were going to send and how Sergeant Dickey sort of volunteered to replace that cook.
Well, there are 2 factors in here, and one that I may not have shared exactly. I had a certain amount of time left in the Army, and I did not see myself as a garrison soldier. I had been in combat for 11 months, carrying a weapon. My attitude might not have been the best as far as military discipline and that kind of thing. I did not want to go back and polish shoes and paint rocks, and I know it's terrible, but I felt more comfortable being in Vietnam. Now, I know that sounds weird, and I didn't think about my family. My mother was terribly upset, as she should have been, for me volunteering to go back over. But that's what I did. And as I came home on leave for 30 days and then returned. And as they promised, a lot of people say the Army doesn't do. They did. They gave me a job as a mail clerk. And while I was there, there came a requisition to our unit, the MP unit, that they needed more infantry. And of course, a lot of people have 11 Bravo, and then they have a secondary military occupational. We had a cook that was, he wasn't the bravest guy I'd ever known.
He was a good cook.
He was a great cook, and he was a good guy. And they were going to send him to an infantry unit, and I did not feel that he was properly trained, nor would he have been very, very good at it. I was afraid that because of his fear, that not only would, he'd be a danger to himself, but also to other people in his unit.
Right.
I went to the first sergeant and volunteered to say, hey, don't send this guy. I don't think he's capable of doing it. At least I can stay alive. I know I've been there, so send me. And he did.
Indeed. In history books, when people talk about the Vietnam War, and you are a former history teacher, and when they're taught the Vietnam War, probably if there was a turning point in the Vietnam War, it'd be called the Tet Offensive. You were there during the Tet Offensive. Describe, if you will, what the Tet Offensive was like. For the people who don't know what it was and what it was like for a U.S. soldier on the ground.
Well, let me start generally. As we found out later, it was a uniquely coordinated offensive. Mm-hmm. The North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong, who were the volunteer arm of the Communist forces, coordinated attacks in, as I remember, 60 different cities at the same time. It was during the Tet, which was between our Christmas and our New Year's. Right. We had just signed a ceasefire agreement with Hanoi, that there wouldn't be any fighting during this period of time, and we were kind of in a stand down. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, shame on us for that, but we were kicked pretty hard. Right. I know that in our unit, at that particular time, we were near Da Nang. Yes, and boy, that was, I can literally say that was the most fighting, most intense combat that I experienced over there. And, you know, they were cranked up and fired up, and they were trying to take the city of Da Nang and all of our bases there and everything. And it was, you know, we fought very, very hard. We pushed them back, and this is when I told you when we got separated. We got, we were really cut off for about 3 or 4 days. Right. And it was not a pretty thing. We lost, I think, about 50% of our company during that period.
And there was a point there that you, because of the communication problem, that you really had to take over the company.
I don't think the Army probably wants to publicize that, but yes, for a few hours, I did have to make logistical decisions about water and food, trying to get our people safe, you know, some kind of a perimeter, you know, where we could defend ourselves until which time, you know, communication was restored, and then we could get some help. The first platoon lieutenant Powers, I believe his name was even estranged from us. He helped a lot. I asked his advice, and he said, "Hey, you know, you're going to have to run things. I'm not there. I can't see, right. But I will help you." And a great officer. Those kinds of people. He did not presume to be brighter than I. He just wanted to give me help, and as a unit, we survived. So it was a good thing.
Frank, I guess when any young man goes to war, whether it was World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, even today, what runs through their mind is, how am I going to feel the first time that I'm put in a position to where I have to shoot at another human being? That happened to you. I want you to talk about that. Actually, there's sort of almost a humorous angle to that you told me about, but tell that story first, and then you told me yesterday about how a person just has to change their personality in a situation like that. Talk about the event first, and then talk about your thoughts about how a person has to change to fulfill that role.
Okay. We were on a search and destroy mission. We were in the mountains. If I remember correctly, we were probably 3 or 4 clicks from the Cambodia border, the Mekong River. Right. And you know, we were trying to keep the VC from slipping through us and getting into the interior. And as we were going through the mountains, of course, you have a machete in one hand, you have your weapon strap, and you're chopping at the deals because you can't get through. It's too thick. And I happened to notice that 3 of the enemy were just, I barely got a glimpse of them. And the trail that we were on curved around and came straight at me. Well, I anticipated that they were walking down the trail. Some of the signals we use in the infantry, everybody get quiet, and then of course we tried, to get our people, to spread out. We didn't have that much time. The warning was not that quick. So when he came around the curve, I was very nervous about my ability to shoot the enemy. I had good training, but you get nervous about it.
Sure.
So I also had an over and under, which had a 40 millimeter grenade launcher under the weapon, and I thought, I can hit something a lot easier with this grenade than I can with a 7.62 millimeter deal. Mm-hmm. So I decided to shoot him with my grenade launcher, and during this tense moment, I had forgotten that I had a flare round in there instead of a heat round. Mm-hmm. A heat round is the actual grenade.
Right.
A flare round is a phosphorus piece that, you shoot it up. It's got a little
right.
parachute with it, and you shoot it up to illuminate at night where you can see. Well, I shot this guy with a flare round. Yeah. it hit him in the chest and knocked him down, and then we captured the other two. Right. As I understand, unfortunately, this guy died later on because of the phosphorus burns on his chest and everything. Mm-hmm. But having to, I was very upset at having taken a life of another human being. Right. It's the way we're raised. It's where we, even though we're trained, it is something that in a normal societal situation such as over here, you're taught not to do that. Right. But dealing with it and grieving and dealing with it, you don't have time for that. Mm-hmm. You're in a combat situation, so you don't have time to deal with your defense mechanisms. You don't have to deal with how you've been taught. You've got to fight, and you've got to continue to function because your soldier mates need you to do that. Mm-hmm. And so it's waited till later to deal with. And a lot of times you have to build up defenses, because if you it'll drive you crazy psychologically. You have to be cold and hard. You have to use some other method to deal with this. Mine happened to be humor, right. Very, very bad humor, I might add, but at least you would kind of laugh and say, well, that ruined his whole morning. Well, right. Obviously it ruined more than his morning, but sure. That you use those to try to ease the pain, and it worked. But again, as we discussed yesterday, they have a name for it now, and I think it's post-traumatic combat syndrome. Mm-hmm. Right. My son is over in Iraq now and will soon return, and he will go through a process, he informs me, of about 60 days, where he will talk to psychiatrists and psychologists, and gosh, I wish they might have had something like that when we returned. Unfortunately, they didn't, and a lot of our guys and gals did not fare well when they came back to real society, right. Because it was hard to change back to right. the rules of this society when and dealing with it, and it was something they needed help. Some of them got help, some of them didn't, unfortunately.
Right. I asked you if you were wounded in Vietnam, and you said yes, but it was almost an afterthought for you. But you were wounded in Vietnam. Talk about that incident, what happened, and what your wounds were.
Well, there were two instances. One was shrapnel, which mm-hmm. Really wasn't much of anything. I got one in the corner of the mouth, a little deal here, and most of the rest of it was in my posterior. Mm-hmm. Because when the first explosion went, we turned and tried to get away. So, I didn't even, the medic took care of it. It was no situation. It was no more than scratching my head as I did the other day working in the yard. So, but the second time was a bullet wound. It went through another person. Bless his heart. But I'm certainly glad he was there for me. But right. It it didn't go in very far. It wasn't a very hard wound. There was a lot of bleeding, but and of course I thought I was dying. You know, that's just the way it is. I had a long talk with the Lord. I probably needed to have that talk long before.
Right.
But at least we had it, and so I was okay. It was, I wasn't out of commission, but about 2 or 3 weeks, and then back. So
I asked Sergeant Dickey if he wanted a Purple Heart, and again, as an afterthought, you said, yeah, you think there's one there somewhere, right?
My mother's home burned in I think 2000, and all of those keepsakes and unfortunately some photographs that you mentioned that you might want were all destroyed, unfortunately, in that fire. So I don't have them to show you, or I'm sure you can contact the Army. They'll have some kind of record that. A blip on the screen anyway.
Wish you could contact the Army and you could get those awards back. Maybe that could be done. Ever the reluctant hero, you also sort of an afterthought told me when we were talking before about a situation where your captain was down and loaded him on your shoulder because you were the biggest guy and you took him pretty much out of harm's way. Reluctant as you are to talk about it, I wish you would.
Well, there was during this situation we mentioned earlier where we got scattered, and still, as I mentioned to you, I'm not really sure how that happened.
Right.
But somehow some of the enemy got behind our lines somehow as we were sweeping, and we got in a situation where it was just the command post. Now that's the forward observer, who's our artillery component. I was the RTO, the radio telephone operator for the captain. The executive officer he was a first lieutenant, and a couple other members of the command post who take care of command things. And there weren't but about 5 or 6 of us there, and the captain got wounded. He got shot in the leg. It wasn't really serious. Well, what wound is not serious?
Right.
I'm sure it was very serious to him.
Right.
At that particular time, I made the decision that we needed to try to get back to our lines somehow. And so I made the decision that we would advance to the rear. To me, we were running away from the enemy. Since I was the biggest guy, I carried the captain. I threw him over my shoulder. He was very upset about the antenna of my radio hitting him in the face and stuff. I mentioned to him that I'd be happy to just put him down and go on without him if it was kind of humorous during that time. But we got him back, and everything was fine.
Probably pleased the way it worked out. There's so much more to tell your story of Vietnam, but in the few minutes we have left, I want to get to other things after Vietnam. You went to Stephen F. Austin. You graduated from Stephen F. Austin. You met your future wife there, who we're going to talk about in a moment. But then you went on into teaching, in public schools, both teaching and coaching basketball and football. New Caney, Galena Park, Sugar Land, Dulles, Rosenberg, Terry, and came here and was head basketball coach at Allen Academy and also taught. So a career after Vietnam, a service in public teaching.
Yes, sir. It was something that I was very passionate about.
Right.
As an advice to any young person looking to have a career, I think passion is the most important element.
Right.
If you're going to do, and I told my son, I recently retired,
right.
And I told him years ago that the day that my job got to be work was the day that I was going to quit.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, I did.
Right.
It was never work to me. It was always a joy. Working with young people, they keep you young, they're different every day. It was wonderful.
Just got a couple of minutes left. Your wife is Dr. Nancy Dickey. for people who don't know who she is, and I don't know who that could possibly be. Dr. Dickey is the president of the A&M System Health Science Center and vice chancellor for health affairs and the past president of the American Medical Association. One of the highest profile people certainly in our community, and the person that you say is the smartest person that you've ever known. Talk about your wife. I know you're very proud of her accomplishments.
She is the love of my life.
Yes.
I hope I can keep from getting emotional here.
That's okay.
She has always been my best friend.
Right.
She's always been my mentor. We have had 35 wonderful years, and we're working on another 35. She has supported me. She's been my team doctor. She's sat in the stands and listened to people begrudge me sometimes using bad language. But no, she's the mother of 3 wonderful children, and our family is my life couldn't be much better.
Indeed, she's obviously one of the most highest profile members of our community, but you know her as a wife and a mom, and I know that she regards that as her most important role.
She certainly does.
Indeed.
Although she doesn't do bad in the other arena.
Indeed. Danielle Marie, Wilson Travis, your son who is in Iraq right now, and Elizabeth, I know are your children. You're very, very proud of them. I wish we had more time to talk about what they're doing, but I want to thank you very much for your service, and I appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Tom.
All right.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
More than 47,000 American military died as a result of hostilities in Vietnam. 30,000 were Army. 70% of those were Army infantry. Frank Dickey understands his fortune to have come home, to have met and married Nancy, and to have been able to raise their 3 fine children. Vietnam is a war that historians will debate as long as there is history. But few will ever debate the bravery of those who sacrificed their most vital years to protect our freedoms. We salute Frank Dickey for his service, and we thank all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville for Frank Dickey. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.